The pursuit of greatness begins at first light and never, ever ends. Time is the enemy, the ally, and the holy grail of every race car driver. Who will be victorious? Only time will tell. Let's go.
Every January, drivers from across the globe make the long trek to the Sunshine State, to the high banks of Daytona, for the traditional start to the major racing calendar year. The stories it's 31 degrees of bacon could tell are massive. It was here last year where preseason championship favorite Dallas Pataska would end up scoring only his one win of the season, where a new partnership between Grizzly Motorsports and Torque Freak Racing led to celebrations with David Barrichello, and where Bombshell Motorsports would start its path to a pro team title with Kurt Crum leading the way. Who will write the next chapter to their stories of this 52-year-old facility? And better yet, who will begin their quest for the Mario Andretti driver's title off in glory? We're about to find out on the Global Sim Racing channel. As we say hello everyone and welcome to the virtual Daytona International Speedway for the first race of the Major Series in the European region season. It's the Daytona 2.4. I'm Justin Prince. Alongside the booth today is Peter McKay, along with all-time Major Series wins leader Christian Challoner. Behind the scenes is our director Sean Ambrose, and he's using cameras provided by Dougie Beard. This track has a lot of history, to say the very least. Let's learn some of that today with our GSRC track guide for Daytona International Speedway.
Welcome to the Daytona International Speedway. While many oval fans associate this Central Florida track with mainly NASCAR, the road course has gained just as much worldwide fame thanks to it hosting motorcycles and sports cars for decades. In fact, the flagship road race, the 24 Hours of Daytona, has become a major draw for drivers of all disciplines, many eager to have a go at endurance racing. The stats make this place sound relatively simple, with 12 corners on the regular road circuit and 14 on the NASCAR version, both spread amongst 3.5 miles. Indeed, a majority of the lap is spent on the oval portion, where you fly along the notoriously steep banking. But it's easy to underestimate the challenge presented to the drivers. The infield portion begins with the scary kinked entry of Turn 1. Not only is it the fastest part of the track, but the transition from the banking to the flat tends to upset the car as you slow it down. There's also the bus stop chicane on the backstretch. Added in the 80s, this is a tricky piece of circuit that punishes a poor exit severely, with it leading back into the latter half of the oval. As you'd expect, the long periods on throttle mean that drafting tends to play a factor in the racing. It also means passing isn't usually too great of an issue if you have the pace to catch someone. The more difficult thing is managing to gap your opponent so that they don't ride in your slipstream once you get by. With half a century of endurance racing collected among these walls, it's not unfair to say that road racers have just as much claim to call Daytona home. Fans who come to watch certainly won't be disappointed by the high speeds and fantastic thrills it invariably provides each year.
That was a look at our GSRC track guide for Daytona International Speedway. Now, let's bring my partner for tonight, one of my partners rather, in Peter Mackay, as we get ready to go racing Daytona. A lot of history here as talked about. Peter, your expectations for these competitors today as they get ready to go racing for 2.4 hours.
Well, thank you, Justin. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Daytona International Speedway is a place that's actually very close to my heart. I was able to visit the facility a year ago for the Rolex 24-hour at Daytona, and it's one of the most incredible race events you're ever likely to go to. We're going to use a very similar set of cars that they use in that particular race. We've got the LMP2 prototype made by Dallara in Italy. We have a whole suite of GTE cars from BMW, Corvette, Ferrari and Porsche, and in the GT3 class we have two brand new cars, the Lamborghini Huracan and the BMW M4 GT3 prototype. And here at Daytona, well, the main thing is traffic management, as is always the case in multi-class sports car racing, but being able to manage the traffic correctly and avoid the incidents, that is the main thing. And from what we're hearing, the GT3 runners at least are going to be able to do the whole race on one set of tyres, so not working the tyre too hard and making it last the whole way is going to be critical.
It's going to be very critical, especially around this 3.56 mile facility. 12 turns anti-clockwise your direction as well. Green flag time in sim will be approximately 5:10 p.m. for today's action as well. The best passing opportunities as well will be in the horseshoes, as well as, if you're daring so, in the bus stop. These drivers as well are looking to prepare for what's expected to be a very competitive 2021 campaign. 2020 was also very competitive, where it was on the pro side. Valverde coming away with the championship with 103 points over Ross Banfield. Riley Thompson, Joshua Wood, Kirk Crum ended up being your top 5 in the point standing, separated by 651 points last season for the driver's title on the pro division side. Dallas Pataska finished in 6th in that title race with Brock, Baker, Mickey, and Henderson your top 10 on that side. Some of the drivers from the sportsman's class will be seen today as well, moving up the ranks, including Sam Harper, who won the Sportsman Championship last year by 420 points, with a nice 8 victories on the season. Joseph Holman and Jan Brodny were your top 3 in those standings. Redeker, Mason Martzov, Sam Watley, Stuart Elder, Scott Kukaz, Alama Lawn among your top 9 competitors. 8 victories, as mentioned, for Harper, a dominant stretch for him on that campaign. Now the question is going to be, though, how drivers react in race in 2021, Christian, as these competitors get ready for what's expected to be a big stretch of races for these drivers today. Let's take a look at our details for today.
Yeah, so a 2.4 hour race, 145 minutes today. They do have one spare car, so if there is one incident, they do get one kind of freebie to have another go at it. I don't suspect that we're going to see anybody in the GT classes, both GTE and GT3, actually changing tyres today. With the race being so late in the afternoon, the temperature is pretty low, so that's a little easier for them. But at the same time, some guys might struggle a little bit towards the very end of the race, so we'll have to watch out for that. Obviously 3 classes as well, so there's a lot of traffic, and that's going to be difficult, especially for prototype drivers to make their way through. And it's going to be probably around about 90 to 93 laps, depending on when our leader crosses the line.
We'll see how things fare out. 90 laps was that mark for the international side in the pro division. These drivers currently in the midst of their final practice for today at the moment, as these competitors see track conditions at the moment mostly cloudy skies. 75 degrees is the air temp, 74 degrees is the current track temp. Flip that around rather, with the winds currently gusting to the north at approximately 6 miles an hour or so. 54% humidity. In sim day is January 17th, 2021. And Peter, today expected to be a very competitive race for all these organizations, especially with drivers like Andrei Rajkovic, who was the quickest driver in pre-qualifying in the field.
Yeah, as you can see, he's running in the P2 class, running for the Huisking-Veld team, the manufacturer of very, very fancy pedal equipment for your sim rig, and looking pretty tidy here in this qualifying practice session right now, keeping it, just showed you there, just a little bit of a wiggle when he's asking for the power. This Dallara P2, the naturally aspirated V8 built by Gibson in Derbyshire in England, and it's got a lot of power and a lot of torque, and when you ask for the power that little bit too early, it will let you know. It's got quite the Latin temperament. It is Italian after all, though.
Indeed, and He's been working on this car for a good past few days in preparation for what's expected to be a very competitive January, to say the very least. But it's also expected to be a competitive race, as talked about Christian. It's the chance to make history. It's the chance to get momentum today, and the chance, in some cases, to have redemption from struggles that happened for your organizations last season. As these drivers getting ready to hear your thoughts on the brand new season, Christian, here, and the chance for drivers and teams to come off in a way with a great start today.
I think it's one of those races where there's always a lot of build-up for it. Obviously, it tends to be the beginning of everyone's season, really, regardless of what you race. So there's a lot of practice time that goes into this event, and I kind of think that builds a lot of expectation as well. Obviously, drivers have been practicing for pretty much a number of weeks, really, for 2.4-hour day and also the 24-hour next weekend. So I think this is probably one of the races where you see people turning up with the most sorted cars, sorted setups, and also they have the best idea in terms of race strategy as well. I think there's a couple of drivers to watch out for. Obviously, you see Joshua Wolf is always good in prototypes, and Dallas Pataska as well tends to be pretty fast in prototypes, but can be prone to kind of getting flustered a little bit in the races, and that can go against him. So I expect a pretty tight fight at the front of the LMP1 field. And to be honest, throughout really all the classes, everybody's really, really close in terms of lap time. So it's gonna come down to who executes the best race.
Especially since there's a lot of teams throughout the field today that we're expecting to see speed with. We've seen Missed Apex, for example, one of the rising teams of 2020, especially in the second half of the campaign, to see how they do. The Grizzly TFR partnership is continuing for this season. That is Grizzly Motorsports and Torque Freak Racing that led to success in 2020. They're working together once more. UDocs has seen a new rebrand. V-Apex is bringing in some different marks. There are a lot of different teams changing things up this season, Peter, but also many that are looking to repeat the same formulas as 2020 for success.
Absolutely, and here in the major series, of course, the adaptability from class to class, car to car, track to track is very, very important, and really shows you who is the kind of ultimate sim racing driver, really, being able to adapt from machine to machine, because you do see a lot of drivers on the iRacing platform who do tend to lean towards one particular car and specialise in it, but you can't afford to here in the Majors series. We've got a couple of friends of the GSRC crew here. We've got Ryan Walker, the other half of Double Scotch, my fellow commentator in the Grand Prix Legends series we have here on the Global Sim Racing channels on Saturdays. Ryan's second fastest in the GT3 category in his Lamborghini at the moment. There he is, going around the high banks, and also Richie Hearn, who commentates with us in the Lionheart series as well, and currently sitting 6th right now, and that is a very, very nice looking car there. I like the paint scheme there, very nice.
Yeah, a lot of experience in the field, to say the very least, Christian. You mentioned drivers like Dallas Pataska, who is currently the quickest in prototype. We have drivers like Joshua Wolf returning, Andrei Rechkovic, the real world drivers we mentioned, or the broadcast commentators who are the experience. Who else are you keeping an eye on today, especially with the amount of talent in this field returning?
Well, I think looking down at GTE class, you got to keep an eye on Tim Claessens. I've had some pretty good battles with him over the couple of years in this series, and I know when he turns up, he's always a force to be reckoned with. So he's a guy I'm looking out for. Pete Harrod as well is always pretty fast, and he's going to be hopefully pretty close to Tim in that class. Moving down to GT3 class, Eric Mickey's always very fast, so I have to keep an eye on him. But Ryan Walker's actually pretty close to him right now, within 2/10, so looks like we could have a pretty good battle, realistically, in all classes, I think.
Absolutely, and keep in mind, with that class, Christian, brand new race cars for the iRacing service in that grouping. It's going to be interesting how those drivers run in those new cars.
Yeah, so this is the thing. With the GT3 cars, obviously, the new additions to the class is the Lamborghini Huracan as well as the M4 GT3. And they're the new cars, so to speak. But really, that entire class can honestly be considered new at this point. It was given a whole new tire, it was given a whole new aero model. Really, every single car in that class has been given a complete overhaul. So it's still quite unknown, I think, to people. Obviously, Season 1's been running for quite a while in the official iRacing season so far, so guys have had a decent amount of time to acclimatize to them, but I don't think anybody's really raced any of those cars at a track such as Daytona, which is a bit of an outlier. There was the Nürburgring in the official series, but still, it's going to be quite different, I think, to what maybe they experienced last year. And from my perspective, it's definitely a very fun class right now, and I feel that those two cars are very, very evenly matched. One thing to keep in mind is that the Lamborghini is ever so slightly a little bit better on fuel around this racetrack, so I suspect that we'll see them save maybe 1 to 1.5 seconds in the pit stops over the course of the race. So there could be some interesting strategy battles there.
Yeah, that's going to be something drivers, especially if they did their homework, going to have to be prepared for today. As drivers have wrapped up final practice, drivers will now move into qualifying for today's action. 10 minutes, 4 laps solo for these competitors to try and set the best times to be able to be at the front of the field. And Peter, how big is qualifying going to be to start off this campaign?
Well, it is critical, really, at Daytona to get a good grid spot, get as high up your class as you possibly can, as well. It is 2.4 hours might sound a lot, but in a field as competitive as this, not necessarily so. So we'll see the obviously the prototypes. They're going to be laying down the quick times. They'll be running on, these cars really come alive when they're on low fuel as well. We're going to see brand new tires, low fuel, and we're going to see who has got the absolute ultimate pace. And of course, 4 laps here is a good chance to get the tires up to full working temperature and have a good go and be able to push all out, because here at Daytona there's a couple of points on the circuit where you've really got to watch out for track limit penalties, or track limits warnings, if you like. One of them is the bus stop chicane, which Eric Mika is just about to come up to there in his BMW M4, and on the particularly on the entry and then the exit of that bus stop chicane, you've really got to be careful to not abuse the track limits, because if you do, your lap will be invalidated. Not such an issue in the race, not necessarily, but here in qualifying, laps invalidated, you've got to go around and do another one. So that's certainly where the driver's going to have to be careful in this particular session. But watch out for the Lamborghinis. It might be that the Lamborghinis might just have the slight edge. Certainly in the real world they have. In fact, the Lamborghini Huracan has won the class at the Rolex 24-hour at Daytona for the last 3 years, and in 2020 was the Paul Miller Racing Team with Brian Sellers, Madison Snow, Corey Lewis winning that particular race.
It's going to be interesting, absolutely, with that in mind. As taking a look at Andrei Rechkovic, we'll see how he does today in this 99. His quickest time in pre-qualify was half a second quicker than the rest of the field, Christian, in the prototype.
Yeah, and really to just continue on with how critical qualifying is around the circuit. Obviously, it's quite a, well, I say it's quite a long race, but realistically now, you really don't think of a 2.4-hour race as being all that long. But the big area that I think is always difficult in this racetrack is actually turn 1, because you always want to push the corner as much as possible to try and get that good start to the lap. But there's so much that you can do there just to get it wrong, which sounds so strange, but the line is very, very narrow actually. So the track drops away off to the right side very, very steeply. So if you end up running wide a little bit, it's very, very damaging to the lap time, because you just struggle to get the car turned in and then get on the power and get out of that corner. But on the other hand, if you run it too close to the inside, you're making the whole corner tighter, and again you're struggling to get out of it. So it's really, really tricky, and it's more about not making a mistake through there than it is gaining any time. And I think that's also true for other corners around the track as well. So to the bus stop, you can lose a lot of time there. You can't really gain a lot of time, and obviously you've got to watch out for the track boundaries, because it's very, very easy to pick up a 1x at those locations as well.
First times are coming in. The current quick time for the prototype is Dallas Pataska's 132.5. He's already pulled off the racetrack and reset to go for another run. Andrei Rechkovic, a 133.2. Then the top drivers at the moment, Ross Banfield in his Corvette, followed by Tim Claeson's Ray Partridge. Ryan Mayer has also bumped his way to second at the moment. Also at the moment, Eric Mickey is currently leading his GT3 class at the moment over Sam Harper. These times going to come in quick and fast around this racetrack, to say the very least. Right now, we're expecting drivers, especially their third laps, to be some of the quickest times, Peter, potentially today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we just get that last bit of fuel burned off and the tyres up to their absolute optimum temperature at the moment. In the GTE class, it's looking like the Corvettes are really, really fast. The top 5, 4 of them are Corvettes at this particular stage. So looks like the C8R, the naturally aspirated V8 in the back of that car, powering nicely on the high banks of Daytona. Of course, we saw that car debuted in IMSA last year. Didn't win at the Rolex 24 in its debut, came 4th, but did set that right in the Daytona 240 on Labor Day weekend. Sorry, Independence Day, my apologies.
Yes. Reg Kovic actually lost some time on the second lap around. We'll see how he is on the third lap. Riley Thompson's bumped him to second. Cordell Cologne, we're taking a look with one of the Grizzly TFR Le Mans drivers. They have 2 different rosters of drivers for this event today. They have Grizzly TFR Daytona, which features Joshua Wolf, Dawson Brock, David Baker, Travis Henderson, Tim Flansons, and then they have Grizzly TFR Le Mans, which was for Brodsky, David Mawernich, Cologne, George Gruber, David Barraclough for their respective groupings. So keep an eye on those drivers today as we take a look at one of the drivers who had some good speed, especially in some of the oval races. Marcus Romner, a 1:33.6 gets him up to 8th in his class.
Yep, we're just seeing some of the hotter times coming in now in GTE. It's still Ross Banfield sitting atop the field with Tim Claessens making it a Corvette 1-2 at this stage. Ryan Mayer in the 915 Porsche 911 RSR in third. Pete Harrod goes 4th, also in a Porsche. So now we've got a bit more of a split. Some of the Porsches getting up there, and it's arguably been the car to have in the GTLM category over the last few weeks, but recently been given a 5 kilogram BOP adjustment with weight added to slow it down slightly.
Yeah, and those BOP adjustments going to be very critical. The balance of power, for those who don't know the short form for that, essentially for BOP. We're taking a look on board with as he tries to bump this time a bit slower by a couple tenths of a second for the number 69 machine. Currently scored inside the top 10, Richie Hearn as well, coming across the stripe to get up to 9th position so far. And these times coming very quickly in Christian. 4 drivers yet to set times of note. Dawson Bronco is at incident points on several of his laps. Ryan Walker's on his first lap. Russell Clausen, who has not hit the racetrack. Those are the only drivers who have not yet set times today. Christian, your opinion on qualifying so far?
I think it's extremely close, and something that we haven't actually mentioned up until this point is how powerful the draft effect is around a racetrack like this. And so this is the thing, right? At the moment, we've got Eric Mickey's around a 44.262 in GT3 to take the pole, and Trevor Vavrovsky's just under 2 tenths behind him with a 44.448. But the thing is, with the draft, really that's going to equalize them out. And so this is a race where there's an opportunity for drivers who maybe are, I don't want to say lacking in pace, but maybe aren't able to hit that ultimate time, might actually be able to compete for a win, so long as they can stay within the kind of draft of the class leader. And also you can save a little bit of fuel as well, so you can kind of play a strategy angle if maybe you don't have the raw pace to get it done. But that's where, in traffic situations, it becomes really, really critical to not get broken up. So if you're the class leader, your goal in, say, GTE or GT3 is always to get a prototype in between you somehow. So, say, coming down to a horseshoe, if you see the prototype go to the inside of the guy behind you, you really always do want to kind of close the door and get that prototype in between you, because then that gives you maybe about 0.5, 0.6 of a second to just have an opportunity to maybe break out of that draft zone. It's really, really difficult to do, but it's one of those cases where we always talk about how the prototypes are working their way through traffic, but there's things that GT drivers can do as well to not necessarily gain in a conventional sense in traffic, but definitely in a strategic sense.
Absolutely. Seeing as Cordell Cologne coming across the stripe a couple 100ths. Check that, couple tenths slower than his previous best time. Ray Partridge so looking to come across the stripe of note. Second in prototypes has changed. That has seen Mike Dinesen bumping his way up to second spot on that side of the garage in one of the TechSense cars. Well, the Hanson brothers have a brand new look this season, deep in the field though in their respective class here. And as Ryan Walker comes across the stripe here, keep in mind as well, Peter, Interested to see what Ryan can do here in the race car. How about P2 now on the board for him here in this session? You've had a lot of experience with him. Your thoughts on what Ryan can do today in race trim?
Well, Ryan's he's got a wise head on his shoulders. That's for sure. I mean, he's always very modest as Ryan. He was saying that he was expecting to be running in maybe the 45s, possibly the 146s in the race, but qualifying he's in the low 144s. So that's a good sign for just over a tenth off the overall pole. And Ryan understands that it's a long race, and watch him in the GT3 category. My fellow Scotsman up in Grangemouth, not that far away from where I'm sitting right now, about 20 miles or so.
Very interesting. Didn't know how close you guys were in the past, but still, though, drivers have finished up qualifying. All drivers have completed their respective laps, and that means one thing. It's time for the starting grid for the Daytona 2.4 to begin the 2021 Major Series European region season. Let's take a look at your starting grid. First is your prototype class. It's Dallas Pataska on the pole by 0.3 of a second over Mike Thieneson. Then it's Riley Thompson in row 2 who will start alongside Judis Buteklis with Joshua Wolf in 5th. Alva Verde will start in 6th today with Andrei Rechkovic in traffic in 7th. One of the big free agent signings for Grizzly Motorsports, David Molernich, will start in 8th position with Marcus Romner in 9th. Travis Henderson rounds out the top 10 starting positions in the class. Richie Hearn will start at 11th with David Barraclough moving over to this class after his victory last year in the GTEs, where it will be Dawson Brock behind him with Shane Norden. George Gruber will start alongside Ettore Sainz Galindo with Henry Bennett starting 17th. Colin Martzoff starts in 18th position. 19th is Mike Golightly with Tom Dreiling in 20th. Brian Barney rounds out the class. Peter, over to you as these drivers get ready in their GTEs as well.
Yeah, certainly a busy field of prototypes. A little bit more condensed in the GTE category. Ross Banfield on pole position in his Corvette C8R, followed by Tim Claessens in the same car. Ryan Mehrer will start 24th, followed by Pete Harrod, Dick Mueller, my apologies, that's a habit. Kurt Kroom will start from 27th with Ray Partridge 28th, and Darwin Mentz and Rob Gall will start 29th and 30th. And finally, Franco Scuri rounds out our GTE runners.
Moving on to GT3, only 10 cars in the class, but actually the closest class with only a second covering the entire group. So Eric Mickey had the pole with a 262, with Ryan Walker not too far behind with a 404. Trevor Bobrovsky actually lost that second position right at the death of qualifying and winds up in 3rd with David Baker alongside him in 4th. Sam Harper, a driver from Sportsman, moving up is in 5th with Cordell Colon in 6th. Makis Akerech in 7th with Marcus Niskasen in 8th, and Claude Bevel and Bob Beltrami, actually a driver from the Americas region, moving over to Europe, lines up in town.
Let's look at your starters for today's actions. They now get rolling through the bus stop for today's action. The charity for today's Daytona 2.4 is the Wounded Warrior Project. To donate, go to woundedwarriorproject.org. These competitors all set to get rolling here at the virtual Daytona International Speedway. We'll see how things fare out for this one. As Peter, your thoughts as we race for a good cause and race for a start of a new season.
Absolutely, a fantastic cause indeed. I think the big story is just going to be how outnumbered the GT cars are with the prototypes. You've got to watch. There's going to be a constant flow of prototypes in this race, and it's just keeping an eye out for them. There's such a speed difference. Prototypes are touching nearly 200 miles an hour at certain points on the high banks, so we've got to watch out for those.
Drivers all set to go racing. The prototypes will lead us to the green flag. The 2021 Major Series season is underway for the European region. And Dallas Pataska with a big launch into turn 1. Riley Thompson under attack on the outside quickly. Several drivers locking up the brakes, while the rest of the classes try and get themselves into turn 1. Off and away go the GTEs with a clean launch, 3 wide into the corner.
Here they go then, the GTEs, all just Corvettes and Porsche 911 RSRs. No takers.
Oh, trouble in your prototypes.
Oh.
Travis Henderson also around in some trouble. Valverde, one of your championship contenders last season, was already put into the tire wall. That's caused checkups in the GTEs.
Yeah, well done from all the GTEs there. Oh, there's a bit of a problem. We've got one of the Porsches off on the grass just after the International Horseshoe. The Corvettes are away cleanly at the front, but got to be careful in those GTEs in the early laps. There's no ABS on those cars, so when the tyres and brakes are cold, you've got to let them bed in, but the leading prototypes already onto the high banks.
This is all about the GT3s, Christian. In comparison's sakes, have had a somewhat calmer start, with Eric Mickey pulling off and away by a couple seconds. They do have respective cars, though, separating them who are involved in some of the incidents, all while the prototypes still run their way to the bus stop.
Yeah, Eric Mickey's done exactly what I was suggesting that the leader should do, and that's to try and get a car in between himself and to get a gap, and he's already out of draft range of second place. So really, he's got a great start and got this under control. Obviously, he's got that RSR behind him that's going to try and repass, but the thing is, he can use that to actually draft away from the rest of the class.
Looking up towards the front end of the first lap, Dallas Pataska leads by a couple of car lengths over Mike Thieneson as he tries to pull off and away from Protectless and Company at the moment. But let's take a look at some of the other drivers where right now Ross Banfield trying to hold on to his class lead, and keep in mind some of the prototypes are going to be in the mix of all this where they were involved in some of those first lap incidents. Valverde has already had to come in and use one of his fast repairs, his only fast repair in fact, Peter. That's going to be interesting for the traffic for these GTEs today.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm really, really tight at the top of the GTE field, and we can expect that throughout the race. And Banfield and Clayson in the Corvette, and Pete Harrod in the leading Porsche, all 1, 2, 3 really close together. There they are as they come down towards the kink, really, really fast, completely flat out through there. And then you got to lean on the brakes hard to try and get it turned in for the West Horseshoe, and then up towards the left-hander to go onto the high banks. But the Corvette's looking pretty tidy so far. Of course, Corvette Racing and its current guys actually debuted here at the Rolex 24-hour at Daytona with Chris Nightfall and the late, great John Paul Jr.
Let's take a look back at the LMP2s at the moment, where Pataska's still up at the front, and taking a look now from second place. The draft, we talked about this, Christian, going to be so big today, but Pataska already has nearly broken it away in some of these sections. The top two have broken away from third on back already.
Yeah, and this is a case where both the leader and second place can work together here to get away. As you say, they've got a nice gap actually right now, but if they fight, then obviously they'll lose that gap and the entire class will group back up. One thing that we haven't mentioned actually is the power reduction on the P2s, and I've heard from a couple of drivers that that's actually made passing a little bit easier for the cars, a little bit more drag limited down the front stretch. So they're finding that it's actually a little bit easier to get by each other than it was previously. So that's obviously going against the class leader in a sense, but it should actually make the racing a bit more exciting for us.
Absolutely, and keep in mind that's with the real world rule regulations and changes. As we take a look at the GTEs once again for the race lead for them, Ross Banfield still holding on for the time being inside the horseshoes. Tim Clayson still in second spot. Peter Rod rounding out the top three at the moment, all bumper to bumper. They pulled away from the rest of the pack by at least a couple seconds.
Yeah, they're really making a big move forward, riding on board on the front bumper of Pete Harrod in his Porsche 911 RSR 17. Beautiful sounding machine, this high-pitched, wailing flat six motor, actually mounted slightly further forward than the usual rear position of a 911, actually in the middle of the car. So if you can get as close as you can to a prototype in a GT, this is it. But we're going to get a good idea here of what sort of speed the drivers have out on the high banks. Pete Harrod in the draft, but these vets have got some ponies on the high bank, on the speedway sections to go through the bus stop, but the Porsche's always got good off-corner traction, and there you go. You can see him just pull in a little bit there, coming through the bus stop, but Pete Harrod's in a good spot here. If you can spend most of the initial stint in the draft with the leaders, you get pulled along, you don't have to do as much hard work, and don't forget, of course, we expect the drivers to go the whole distance on one set of tyres, so not having to do the hard work at the front could be an advantage later on.
Absolutely, as they still stay tucked in line and continue to try and save a little bit. And eventually, Christian, of course, in this type of race, you have to keep in mind with the couple pit stops in line, How long do you decide, okay, I'm going to save and just tuck in line before eventually you say, okay, it's time to go and see if I can get a push for a run?
Well, I think it comes down to track position. Obviously, in this sense, if you're sticking with the leader, I don't think that you ever really go until. So, say if you're trying to extend by 1 lap, you don't go until you absolutely know that if you make a move and then you're the leader, that you're going to be able to run that extra lap. Otherwise, I would just sit. I mean, even the entire run potentially to just save that extra lap of fuel, because it will pay off. It's less time in the pit stop, either right there and then or in the last stop of the race when you're coming in for that splash there.
Keep in mind the battle for 4th position for this class as well is going to have to deal with some of the LMP2 traffic coming in from those earlier incidents. That's Valverde driving right on by and lost him a little bit more time. Let's talk a bit about the traffic, Peter, especially with the faster classes coming towards the other classes today, with a difference of upwards of 12 seconds for some of these drivers today. How tricky do you feel it's going to be in the span of these 2.4 hours?
Well, yeah, it's going to be very hard. I mean, it's all. There's going to be a little bit of luck involved, as there always is in multi-class sports car racing. Daytona's a little bit different in a way. It's kind of a similar idea to Le Mans in many ways, because there are long parts of the circuit which are in a straight line, and that's if you're in the prototype, if you're in the faster class, you can really try and get as many moves done as you possibly can. When we get to the more technical parts of the circuit, like the International Horseshoe and the West Horseshoe, that's actually where this prototype, this Dallara P2, is kind of really unhappy at low speeds. It can understeer, it can oversteer, it can be really quite unhappy indeed, and that's where the GT cars really come into their own. For example, in braking, the GT3 car actually is really, really nice around the tighter sections here. So that's really, when you're in a prototype, you kind of don't want to catch a GT car at that point, because that's when the pace evens out slightly.
Taking a look back towards the front of the prototypes, and Dallas Pataska is still up at the front. Dallas Pataska, of course, very successful here, Christian, back last year in the European region, looking to try and do a repeat here today. But for him in satellite racing, had some great speed on some of the road courses. Just couldn't get some of the luck in a lot of the races, though, when he had winning pace in some races.
Yeah, Dallas is a driver who's always been quite aggressive in battle, and sometimes it can go against him. I think for the most part, it goes in his favor, but obviously in a championship such as this, it can go against you if you're involved in too many incidents. And realistically, he just got unlucky too many times last season. Obviously a driver that we know has the pace, and showing it again here today.
Right now, he's got some of the fastest laps on the racetrack, 1:33.7 at the moment. The fastest lap overall is set by Riley Thompson, who is hanging on to this pack, by the way. You see him right at the very edge there of the 98's draft at the moment. Riley Thompson, also quick in these prototypes, if you remember back to last year, was a top runner behind Dallas Pataska, in fact. These drivers continuing to roll their way around, just about 10 minutes or so into the action as we take a look towards some of the other trains building up. This is currently second on back GT3s at the moment, Christian, where right now Eric Mickey has ran away from these cars by upwards of 4 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. Trevor Bobrovsky managed to get ahead of Ryan Walker, and really is kind of just building this huge line of cars behind him. We see actually Sam Harper made a great start and is really holding on to what is essentially a battle for second. All while this is going on, Eric Mickey is just slowly pulling away from the field. He was about 2 seconds ahead 2 laps ago, and he's managed to extend that out to about 3.3 seconds here. But nobody looks like they're ready to fight in this pack. Everybody just seems content to ride behind Trevor at this point, but it is allowing Eric to get away. And I don't know. No. I think at some point somebody has to try and take the lead and try and pull them back up to Eric.
Bit of trouble for one of the Bombshell Racing Team cars up the road. Of note, Ryan Mayer spun around in the West Horseshoe. He's lost several positions. One of the drivers competing in the iRacing Blood About Lost Nostra Drink Sprint Cars World Championship GTE class today, as we still follow along with the GT3s. The GTE lead, meanwhile, is still bumper to bumper, while the Corvette's still looking to scrap a little bit. It's on board here with the 451 as he tries to get the run.
Yeah, riding on board with Tim Klassen's trying to get the move done on Banfield here. The two Corvettes really starting to just adding a little bit of a margin from Pete Harrod in the Porsche. Now this is interesting. I think that Klassen's had the run there. He could have perhaps gone for a move, but quite happy to sit there. But you've got to really trust one another in those type of situations, especially as Christian mentioned, rightly under it before the show, coming into turn 1, there's a lot of places where you can make mistakes, and really costly mistakes at that. You're coming from absolutely the very top of top gear, and you're slowing the car down to probably second gear for the GTEs. And you really got to be very, very careful not to collide with one another. We see it so many times there. And interestingly there, that's maybe not quite paid off for Tim Claessens. He could have maybe gone past Banfield there, backed off, and that's allowed Pete Harrod to recover and get back into the draft.
Up at the front, Riley Thompson has taken the race lead just now at the start and finish line. That's because of all this traffic. Remember that train we were just talking about with the GT3s. A bit of contact with some of these cars as David Baker drives by, and one spin around. It's Thompson. Thompson into the Armco barrier. And Riley Thompson stuck against the Armco barrier, and this is going to lose him a ton of time on the racetrack. Take a look at what happened. That was double wide traffic just about in front of him, and it's Dallas Pataska who gets in the back of him, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. That was Dallas Pataska is going to definitely get some damage from that as well. But Riley Thompson just minding his own business, and it was just getting all too busy there. But that's such a hot spot for action between the prototypes and the GT cars, because through the faster bits, the prototype really gets into a little bit of a stride there, and there's not much room. It's very narrow. And yeah, just a little bit of a car park there. So back to the GT leaders, still Banfield and Claessens back together. So Claessens just got, I think, these Corvettes definitely got a bit of an edge on the Porsche 911 RSR of Pete Harrod. Could come a little bit down to set up, but whoa, I think Claessens is now they're getting a bit impatient, JP.
Yeah, starting to really try and make some moves here on this UDOX machine. Keep in mind, they have changed a little bit of their branding for this season, where they slimmed down the driver's lineup and have a full commitment of the llama motif, where they embrace a lush Pantone purple hue. With the metallic Tron decals laid atop of their carbon bases for the cars this season. They also look to embrace mascots this unit, from Frank the Whale to Loa the Llama to Oliver the Cat, which is the latter for apparently crashing post-race interview with Ross Banfield at the time for last season. So looking to go on the more fun side when it comes to Ross Banfield and his unit for this season. Right now they're having fun of the early going in this one, Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for these guys in GTE right now, they look like they're fighting really hard, but I'm unsure as to whether there's any real need to. Neither of them are going to be able to get away from each other. They're not really helping each other pull away from the rest of the class either. And really, it's just going to come down to a strategy race between these two right now. Obviously, we see the RSR getting dropped a little bit in the background. And I think that really, in a race like this, these guys are just going to be stuck together the entire time. It's absolutely going to come down to that last pit stop, who comes out ahead, and if there's any opportunity to get away from one another in terms of draft. And we've kind of seen the GT3s have started to get split up a little bit after we had that incident with the LMP2 leader, sorry. And I think it's just going to continue that way throughout the rest of the race, where it's all about how traffic breaks everything up.
Right now they still have a bit of a cushion before the prototypes make their way towards them by about another 10 minutes or so, give or take, maybe 5. But the lights are now on the race cars, just like that. And keep in mind, a lot of the teams, Peter, as well, build their setups more towards the full darkness in some cases because of the track conditions they'll be facing, especially if you're, say, in tightly fought classes like this one.
Indeed, yep. Of course, we're going into the night here at Daytona. It's a little bit of a different experience than, say, the Le Mans 24 Hours, where there's large parts of the circuit which isn't lit. But here at Daytona, it's
oh, trouble! Eric Mickey, GT3 race leader's been hit by some of the prototypes. That was with the 11 car. Entor Santos Galindo got in contact with them, and the 86 had to take some of the access roads and has lost the class lead.
It's going to be extremely frustrating for him to have that. Obviously, he built up a pretty big lead. I think he's about 3 seconds into the lead. But this is what can happen in multi-class racing. And I know there's always that feeling as a GT class that you're waiting to be hit. And there we see that really is just not a passing point, but that is a choke point between the classes, because as we saw earlier with Dallas Mataska, it just slows everybody down. The GT3 needs all the room and all the road through that area. An LMP doesn't, but an LMP will have so much more speed at that specific moment. The LMP has to check up. There's just no question about it. The GT3 car can't alter its line through there, and it's all on the LMP car to get around it.
And that, as a result, Eric Mickey is shuffled to third. Rick Sakowicz has moved up to second, and Trevor Vibrovsky is now your current class leader. That right now is a gap of about a second plus now as a result. Mickey's not going to be too happy, to say the very least. This team, keep in mind, brand new sponsorship this season for Bombshell Racing Team from Pitbox.io and Lazy Rocket for this campaign. Hence the new look on their respective race cars, as Mickey has several more prototypes closing on in. And Peter, when you have an incident like that, how difficult is it to try and get your mind back in focus, knowing you had a big lead, you had already broken the draft, and now you have to claw your way back up again, especially with traffic coming up and quick behind you?
Well, I think in Eric Mickey's case, he's just got to remind himself that he did have that pace, and it appears like his car is relatively straight. Doesn't look like there's too much damage there, so hopefully he'll be able to continue that pace and get himself back to the front where he was previously. But yeah, as Christian explained very, very well, that is such a danger spot for contact between prototypes and GTs. That really stole a class win away for Catherine Legg a number of years ago in the Acura GT3, with again a prototype coming through and making contact. But this leading trio still glued together, and they're putting some big distance between themselves and the rest of the GTE field, about 9 seconds back to Mainz in fourth. But I think Pete Harrod in the Porsche, he's playing very, very smart. Definitely that 5 kilogram BOP adjustment has really hampered the Porsche back compared to what it was. What's amazing though, of course, last season they almost used to call this class Formula BMW with the BMW M8, but no takers for that car, so definitely an adjustment there. And that's how it works in GT racing. You have some days in the sun and some days you don't. But so we look back at P3 in the GT3 class, Ryan Walker in there, and he's got the full endurance lights on the front of that Lamborghini.
Yeah, that's currently fourth, rather, in the battle for now for third. And here's the interesting mark, Christian. We've seen a lot of fuel saving in the GTEs. Do you expect with these cars here to do the same now and just ride on behind, or do they try and take advantage of Mickey in his situation?
Well, it's about 31 and a quarter laps running on your own in a GT3 car. So if you're able to save a little bit, I can see drivers being able to get out to 32 laps. And I think with the Majors Series not running the official iRacing Daytona 24-hour BOP, that does make it a little bit easier for maybe a Lamborghini to stretch out to that 32 lap mark. And I really think that would be a good strategy for someone such as Ryan Walker right now. Obviously, he's got Eric Mickey in front of him. Mickey's presumably furious about what's happened and is trying to get back to the class lead, so he doesn't look like he's saving any fuel at all. But for other drivers, it's definitely an option, and that shorter last pit stop, I mean, with how close everybody is in the class right now, if you can run 1 lap longer each run, then the amount of fuel that you're going to take on the last stop is